of Exodus, starting in chapter 14. And what we've got in this situation is that the Israelites are finally able to leave Egypt. There are all of those plagues that occurred thanks to God intervening on behalf of his people. And Pharaoh had finally said, okay, you can leave. The Israelites didn't waste a lot of time. In fact, God had prepared them, and even in the preparation for getting the Israelites out of there, he was laying down some rules for them to follow from then on. And this became the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. And you may remember that part of that involved uh, baking bread that did not have to wait to rise. So no yeast was being used. And it was to be a reminder to the Jewish people from then on that this was how they were to celebrate this time and how they were supposed to teach their children. There was also a number of rules that were brought in about the firstborn being consecrated to God, meaning the firstborn son was to be devoted to God and had to be redeemed with a lamb. Kind of the same thing with a donkey, oddly enough. I found that a little bit humorous, but the firstborn donkey was to be redeemed with a lamb if you're going to keep it, or you would have to kill the donkey. And that being that donkeys were one of the animals they could use but could not use for a sacrifice, so there had to be a substitution. There was also this substitution in having a lamb for the firstborn son, so you kind of understand how um, that would lead to um, the substitution of Jesus dying for the sins of everybody else later on. All right, so having said that, let's get back to the actual departure from Egypt. So the people left. There were two roads that they could have followed. One would have taken them directly up into the land of the Philistines, which is the promised land where they were supposed to end up. And God decided, no, I'm not going to send them up there because the Philistines will fight and these people are not quite ready for it yet. They might decide to run back to Egypt, so we don't want to have that. So he went by the second road, and this was the desert road. And from a military standpoint, it was the wrong way to go because as they went out into the desert, they have this road, the desert, and then there's the Red Sea waiting. And there's nothing out there for these people. And it looks to the Egyptians like they're just wandering around, not knowing what they're doing. Of course, they haven't counted on God knowing what to do at this time. And he does have a plan. Now, the people of Israel are being led by a column of smoke during the day and a column of fire at night. So this column was always ahead of them and guiding them where they should go. So wherever it went, they were to follow it. All right, so they are doing that. They get out to the desert. Pharaoh decides, and his people as well, what have we done? We've let the Israelites go. They do all of the work. We've got to get them back. So he loads up the army. Now note, he doesn't send out a police force. He sends out the best of his army. He loads up chariots. They're kind of like what we would think of as tanks nowadays. The Israelites don't have weapons, and so this is really overkill in a sense that he's sending out the strongest part of his army after them to bring them back. Well, the Israelites are scared and they're thinking, oh, we're going to die out here in the desert. Why didn't we stay where we were? And that's the kind of whining that would come to Moses for 40 years. And let me tell you this, God does not like whining. Now, at this time, God moves the pillar around in between the Israelites and the Egyptians. And when I say he moves the pillar, that pillar is often described as the angel of the Lord. So it's not like there's an easy way for the Egyptians to get to the Israelites. They've got to essentially go through God to get there, and they're not going to be able to do that. So um, the people are again kind of whining toward Moses, what are we going to do? And Moses says, look, just sit tight and wait. God's going to take care of us. Meanwhile, God talks to Moses and says, hey, get the people up and moving. We're getting out of here, and you're going to see something today, the way I deal with Pharaoh. And what God does is amazing, because he starts an east wind that's blowing on the Red Sea and pushes the waters away so that there's a wall of water on either side and dries out the land below it. And he tells the Israelites, go out over that. So they head out. Of course, they're seeing water on both sides of them. But the Egyptian army's behind them, so there's plenty of incentive for them to head across. And they get across. Well, then God moves the pillar of smoke. Now, what you have to know about this, and it's often not known, is that really by this time the pillar shows itself as fire and it's giving light, because this is at nighttime. So normally you did not conduct military operations at night, but there's all this light given by God. The Egyptian army has it. They see the people getting away. They see the dry land. They send the army down in there. I've got to think a lot of the regular soldiers would have been nervous about this, because they know something is going on that they cannot explain. But they are ordered by Pharaoh, and he goes in with them. The Egyptian army is now looking at the Red Sea on either side of them, and they're trying to close in on the Israelites. The Israelites make it out, and God has Moses stretch out his staff toward the sea, and the waters collapse in on them. Now the Israelites are safe at this point. The Egyptians are now dead. They had been running into problems anyway, because God had been messing with the chariots coming across, and they were getting stuck, and wheels were falling off and that sort of thing. Again, it should have been something that told the Egyptians that leave these people alone, but they were not going to do it, and they lose Pharaoh and their army, or at least the best parts of their army, all at one time. So the Egyptians really don't want to record these events, so there's not been anything that we found in archaeology about it, but not surprising, because the great kings of that time would only talk about their victories. They would never talk about their defeats. And especially in this case, where this pharaoh's dead, it's like, let's go to the next pharaoh and just forget about this unpleasantness. But what we have here is that the Israelites have now escaped Egypt. They've had God's help. They've seen it happen. And this becomes a legacy that, oddly enough, the Israelites don't appreciate enough. But the other peoples around them, they remember this. They know what happened, and they fear the one and true God. So I'm going to wrap it up at this point. This was kind of a quick story, but it gives. There are times to be scared and fearful of things that happen to you, and that's just an automatic reaction. But what God wanted to get into the Israelites, and what we need to remember today, is not to fear the events of the world, but to fear not doing what God wants us to do. In other words, we should do what God wants us to do and be focused entirely on what He wants, and not worry about the world around us. Because if we're okay with God, then whatever happens in the world, we're going to be okay eventually. All right, with that, I'm going to let you go. And today's tie, simple red to represent the Red Sea. That's the center point of this story to most people. we of course know that the Red Sea was a means to an end to show how God will take care of his people. All right. With that, I'll let you go and hope to see you next time. Bye.